Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second episode of my podcast on healing workplaces. Today, we're going to talk about the subtle and maybe not so subtle signs that may indicate that you're working in a toxic or unhealthy workplace. And I'm going to brush on how you can take care of yourself when you are evolving in a toxic work environment. So, the causes of toxic workplaces are numerous, and we can see them at many levels within organizations. So, if I was to create a model for toxic workplaces or explaining toxic workplaces, which is the topic of the research that I'm conducting at the moment, I would say that you have systemic elements, systemic causes. You have causes that lie in leadership, behavior, leadership style, and you also have causes at the individual level as well. So, we're going to talk about all of those. And I think we can start with some of the systemic causes, and then make our way to leadership and individual behaviors that are present, tolerated, and even sometimes encouraged in toxic workplaces. One of the elements or the systemic elements, or what you will see if you're involving in a toxic workplace, is that organizational values are mainly words on a website and they always look good. They usually include respect as part of the organizational values, but they're not actively demonstrated. And values, they need to serve as guiding principles in decisions, in actions, and in the messages that are communicated within the organization, usually by leadership. We know that organizational culture stems from leadership behavior, leadership decisions, and leadership style. And organizational integrity plays a crucial role in fostering a culture of trust. So when employees see that organizations actually act in line with their values, then there's a better chance to create trusting relationships. Companies promote values such as respect, fairness, safety, and employee well being. Their employees will expect these principles to be reflected in company actions or practices. Conversely, companies that violate these values by ignoring disrespectful behavior, demanding more from employees and managers with fewer resources, and failing to recognize individual contributions, that all erodes employees' trust, and they will see an increase in employee cynicism. And of course, with cynicism comes lower productivity. A company, for instance, that claims to have an inclusive environment or culture, or to be very green or environmental in their actions or decisions, need to align those words in practice. When they don't align, we can call that greenwashing, or we can call it care washing. And this message will create frustration within employees, especially if employees were attracted to the company because of those values. Once they are in and they start working for the organization, and they realize that it was a marketing it was an HR marketing plan, and that there's no real value to what they were advertising in terms of having a safe workplace and a positive work culture, then many employees will eventually leave. And when they leave, they may share their negative work experiences with their network, which will lead to a certain amount of harm to the company's reputation. It'll damage their employer brand, and it will reduce its ability to attract new talent. So I think organizational integrity in terms of the values that are advertised is extremely important. In many toxic workplaces, actions will not follow words. So there will be promises of taking care of employees, employee well-being, but really this is just going to be a facade under which you won't see any real, genuine intention and actions that align with those values. There are a lot of studies that show that candidates will prefer a company with a supportive culture rather than a competitive one. And I think most employees are looking for a work environment that fits with their values. And again, this cannot be just a promotional stunt organizations have to actually live the values they advertise. Also, in toxic workplaces, you'll find that policies are not implemented appropriately. I think it's a similar problem to the one that I just talked about, where following social movements like hashtag Me Too and Black Lives Matter, a lot of organizations have rushed to create and implement a new or revised harassment, equity, diversity, and inclusion policies. And the problem is, again, the best policies are only as good as their implementation. One of the problems is that a lot of those policies remain suboptimal in many organizations because complaints of harassment, for example, or discrimination are really handled inadequately. This often gives an unfair advantage to those who behave in harmful ways, sending victims the message that they will not be protected and supported by their organization. And again, a policy, however clear and comprehensive it may be, will only be useful if it is well implemented. And this means believing employees, this means taking care of them, supporting employees and protecting employees who come forward with harassment complaints, for example, or who bring problems forward, and taking the right steps in dealing with the situation. When complaints are handled unfairly and actions are taken that actually serve to protect the aggressor rather than the victim, employees become cynical, there's distrust, and again, one of the consequences will be employee turnover and employee mental health issues. So you raise the risk of absenteeism, and with cause, employees who bring problems forward or see problems in the workplace and realize that the organization is ignoring the problem, knowing that some employees are suffering, you will see negative effects on people's mental health and a rise in stress and anxiety. When there are very few consequences for employees or managers who disrespect others or act against the organization's values, employees will not trust the system. And I've seen a lot of organizations saying we have a reduction, or we have very, very few harassment complaints or discrimination complaints. But when you actually look at the reasons underneath the fact that they have very few complaints, many times we'll see that it's not that the organization does not have any harassment problems. It actually is that people don't trust the system, so they do not bring problems forward. Employees stay silent. And I think failing to hold perpetrators accountable will inevitably increase toxicity in the workplace. And we'll get back to that in other episodes, but I definitely think that the consequences for perpetrators should be explained and presented in those sessions where we talk about equity, diversity, and inclusion, or harassment in the workplace. I think that would increase the effectiveness of the training, or anti-harassment training. And that leads to another problem that we see. It is systemic, but it's also related to senior leadership. It is permissive senior management in the face of toxic behavior. So many organizations and higher management will turn a blind eye to how individuals achieve performance criteria. For example, if a manager meets the financial objectives set for them, they will receive rewards and recognition. However, those organizations rarely question the means undertaken to achieve these objectives. Have there been any departures due to illness, resignations, or unjustified employee movements in that manager's team? Too often, senior managers decide to ignore certain behaviors, either because they consider performance to be more important than employee well-being, because they don't have the means to act, or because they fear spreading a negative image. And we often see, even when the senior management and HR know that a manager has misbehaved, instead of dealing with the situation, they move the manager to another team, to another division. And instead of dealing with the problem, really, they are spreading toxicity. And the message that is sent to managers and employees is that toxic behavior is tolerated and that victims will not be protected, but perpetrators will. So that is all part of, and it becomes part of the organizational culture, regardless of what the organization is selling in terms of their very positive organizational culture. If perpetrators are not made accountable for their behaviors, and if there's no discipline associated with negative behavior, then the organization is sending out a clear message that they are accepting these behaviors as part of leadership. Now we can talk about causes associated with leadership style and individual causes. There's one that I think is really important, and it is both perpetrated by leadership and individuals within teams. And we're talking about violent workplace behavior. By that, I mean incivility, being disrespectful, harassment, sexual harassment, psychological harassment. Perpetrators of these types of misbehavior can present different profiles, and I will talk about it in future episodes. But the impact of both incivility and harassment in the workplace is significant on employees' mental health, on productivity, on team morale, on culture as well. And a lot of people will think that incivility may be because it is I would say, milder form of violence in the workplace. It's associated with lack of respect. But actually, in one of the studies that I did with one of my PhD students, we found that incivility had a very strong, in fact, stronger impact on employee well-being than conflict or harassment in the workplace. Partly because incivility spreads very easily and it easily becomes part of the organization's culture. Discrimination, another form of violence in the workplace, and in toxic organizations you will see discrimination where differences, whatever they are, right? It could be gender differences, it can be ethnic differences, personality trait differences, neurocognitive differences, are all viewed as flaws, instead of looking at the fact that what research has been showing us is that diverse teams are more creative, more innovative, their performance is better. But in toxic workplaces, it is a fit in or feel left out type of culture. And it puts a lot of pressure on employees to act a certain way, to be a certain way, even sometimes to look a certain way. And if you don't fit in this one quote unquote right way to act or to be or to work, then you're cast aside. And that's when you're discriminated against. And this is also one of the reasons that many organizations lose so many talented employees, because they don't feel that they belong in an organization. And the feeling that you don't fit in to a toxic culture is quite normal, because to fit into those culture, it would mean that you are comfortable with the values that are shared in a toxic culture. When you evolve in a more dangerous or unhealthy or toxic, if you want, culture, you'll see that there's a very strong culture of silence. In a toxic culture, employees are expected to keep silent when they witness unethical behaviors. If they don't, then they are seen as problematic employees or traitors even to the culture. These cultures challenge our values, and oftentimes employees feel that they are living a lie. It can feel like stepping into another dimension where laws and morality are very different from what employees expect. And it takes a toll on everyone's mental health when you have to evolve in an environment that doesn't fit your moral or other values. I was saying that in toxic cultures, employees bring unethical behavior forward are seen as disloyal, and that type of disloyalty is often punished. In those cultures, we'll see whistleblowers or employees voicing their concerns being retaliated against. And I'll do one episode just on retaliation against whistleblowers. Speaking out is seen as a breach in trust, and it obviously has devastating effects on these employees' mental health and physical health. They are cast aside, they are punished. Oftentimes, it has a huge impact also on their careers. And we also see that employees bringing forward problems for harassment or discrimination, we'll see them being fired or pushed to leave their job or the organization, while the perpetrators are still there and thriving. So that's definitely one of the big red flags. In a toxic culture, employees are not supported, obviously, and they have no voice. Now, we know that supporting employees is an essential part of positive cultures and leadership. And in toxic cultures, there is no support and there is no listening to employees either. So you've got either autocratic leaders who want to be obeyed, I would say. And you have micromanagers who are obsessed with control and details. And you'll also find laissez-faire leaders. Those are absent leaders. And that is also associated with toxic leadership and toxic workplaces, because leaders who are not there for their teams, they can't listen, they can't support them, they can't offer the resources for employees to do their jobs. All of these types of leadership, whether it's abusive, whether it's absent, whether it's micromanagement, they all take a toll on employee well-being. And in all of those types of leadership, there's no listening and there's no autonomy either. What we found in our studies on toxic leadership is that leaders who usually use these types of leadership behavior and style, especially with the absent leaders and the abusive leaders, we found a high correlation with narcissistic and psychopathic traits in leaders. Again, I'll talk more about that in another episode. So you might be asking, how do I survive these toxic cultures? And obviously, I don't have all the answers, but I will give you some recommendations. I think the first step is definitely to protect yourself and your health, physical and mental, and your career. Keeping your distance and your relationships with people in the workplace very professional is, I think, good advice for when you think or you feel that you're working in a very difficult environment. Don't spend more time at work than you need to. I know this seems kind of obvious, but a lot of employees feel guilty for not giving extra hours to work. And Those toxic cultures, those toxic workplaces, they will ask a lot more from employees. And those who are ready to give more, to try to feel accepted, to try to fit in, will just burn out. And their work will not be recognized because it never is in those types of cultures. Write everything down. If you're having difficulty, if you are feeling stressed, if you see that you might be the target of harassment or incivility or discrimination, make sure that you write everything down. Who was there during those altercations? What happened? Where were you? What was said and what was done? And seek legal help as soon as possible if you can. And of course, if you need to. When you're in a toxic workplace, I think it's very similar to when you're in a toxic relationship. It changes the way that you view yourself, it changes your notion of self worth. And I would advise that you start working on making sure that you know your worth, looking at the damages that maybe working in that work environment did to your self confidence, to the view that you have of your own competence, and work on your thoughts and write them down. I'm never popular when I tell people to write their thoughts down, but it's good. It's a good thing because oftentimes when they stay in our minds, we don't see them as clearly. When we write them down and then read them later, we realize what we are telling ourselves. Sometimes the negative self-talk that we can have. Make sure that you put down limits at work. Do your job well to be satisfied and of course to secure your job, but try not to overdo it. Keep your energy to do the things that you love, to take care of yourself outside of work, to spend time with the people that you love and who love you for who you are. And because you have to be healthy to be able to leave. It takes strength to stay, and it also takes strength to leave at those types of workplaces. And having a support network is essential. It is key to being able to survive in a toxic workplace. And then to the question that you might want to ask me, should I report it or should I not? And the guilt that comes with not reporting. I would say if you trust HR, if you trust your manager, you can bring up concerns. However, test the waters first and make sure that you talk to others who've brought up problems and see if they were supported by the organization or if they were retaliated against. And then you know if you can trust them or not. And if you can't, and I understand, we all need jobs, or most of us do, to pay rent and pay for everything that we need in life, of course. And so it's not always easy to leave toxic workplaces, but if you see that you will not be supported, and if you are the target of any type of violent behavior in the workplace, I would say eventually you need to leave and find another job. And my recommendation is to do it as discreetly as possible, to send out your resumes. Do not inform anyone from your workplace. You can get the support of maybe a career coach or psychologist, even your friends, and maybe start developing new skills for future jobs as well, and know yourself, know your worth on the market, but do it discreetly for sure if you want to increase your chances of being able to leave and survive your toxic workplace. One thing I want to convey, a message that I think is so important, is that suffering in a toxic workplace is definitely not a sign of weakness. It is a sign that your body is reacting appropriately to danger. You are in a dangerous situation. Maybe not physically, but certainly psychologically. And the brain doesn't see the difference, and it sees that you're in danger. So the stress that you're feeling the mental health symptoms. It could be anxiety, it can be loss of sleep, it can be symptoms associated to burnout or depression, are normal. They're normal if you are evolving in an unhealthy, toxic workplace. So you're not weird, you're not abnormal, you're not weak because you are not feeling well, because you're suffering. I think it's just normal. And again, it's a way for your body to say something's wrong here. We're not safe and you need to take care of this and you need to take care of yourself. Thank you for listening. I really do hope that my podcast is helping some of you. I will continue posting new episodes and I hope that you'll join me. The next one will be on dark personalities in the workplace. So I'll be talking about individuals who present dark triad personality traits: narcissism, Machiavellianism, psychopathy, who they are, and their impact in workplaces. Now, I may do more than one episode on dark personalities in the workplace. I wrote an entire book and I've been studying and researching those personalities for more than 10 years. But this is going to be kind of an introduction to my research and the research and the work of others on dark personalities in the workplace. So I hope you'll tune in. Until then, take care of yourself and the people around you. Bye-bye.